Amanda Waller assembles a collection of cons at Belle Reve prison and forces them to join the Task Force X, who are dropped on the island of Corto Maltese, where they are sent on a search and destroy mission, and as always, if they disobey orders or make one wrong move, they die. The Suicide Squad became one of my most anticipated upcoming movies the minute I heard James Gunn was attached to write and direct. I loved both Guardians of the Galaxy movies. The first in particular has remained one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. He's a writer and director that really knows how to embrace the silliness of the characters and stories he's adapting while still allowing the audience to connect to the characters in emotionally investing ways, and I was really excited to see how he was going to do that for the members of Task Force X. I am overjoyed to report that the Suicide Squad is everything I hoped this movie was going to be. This movie is bonkers and ridiculous in all the right ways, delivering an experience that is just as absurdly awesome as it is hilarious, while managing to balance the absurdity with the emotional weight that allows you to sympathize with the characters and actually care about whether or not they live or die. Much like James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy movies before it, the Suicide Squad focuses heavily on its core group of characters in a way that highlights James Gunn's soft spot for outcasts and misfits. The movie really goes out of its way to examine these supervillains in a way that really made me enraptured by them. While some characters are given more backstory than others, it's through the interactions between these characters that you really begin to understand who they are as people, and Gunn does a fantastic job at conveying the fact that while many of these characters have done absolutely horrendous things in the past, they're still just people. In many ways, the Suicide Squad is a touching tribute to DC's C to F-list characters, as a lot of depth and exploration is given to characters like Ratcatcher 2 and fucking Polka Dot Man, showing that despite their utterly strange and off-the-wall skill sets and sometimes even stranger backstories, they are still characters worth exploring. The Suicide Squad's narrative presents a window of opportunity for many of these characters to redeem themselves. Redemption arcs are definitely nothing new, but what really grabbed me about the way the theme of redemption was handled in this movie was how the characters themselves respond to the idea of redemption. Each character interprets the concept in completely different ways, which creates tension among the characters because it leads to disagreement among them, which is great because it allows you to understand what the characters value morally and showcase what they're willing to do and how willing they are to ensure the mission's completion. Although for me, the greatest source of tension in the film is the knowledge that any scene in the film could be my favorite character's last. A lot of superhero movies nowadays do tend to lose some of their tension because you know that certain characters aren't going to die in this movie because they're going to appear in the next one, they've got a sequel or a spin-off coming up, or they may appear in someone else's movie, so you kind of know that those characters are going to make it out alive. The Suicide Squad doesn't have that problem at all, giving it a rare sense of danger because it's made profusely clear very early on that no one is safe from the kill switch. The movie even seems to indulge itself in seeing characters get killed off in increasingly gory and gruesome ways in near merciless attempts to evoke a notable reaction from the audience. It makes the characters in this movie feel expendable, which does sound like a criticism, but in this case it absolutely works in the film's favor because it ups the stakes considerably. Some deaths are so over the top and ridiculous that it becomes hilarious, and other times the deaths can be genuinely heartbreaking. Either way, every single death is able to leave a lasting impact on something, whether it's the emotional response of the audience or the moral and emotional consequences they have for the narrative and the characters. My favorite characters were Idris Elba as Bloodsport and John Cena as Peacemaker. These two work so well together that whenever they're in a scene, it's more often than not absolutely hilarious, and I mean that in the best way. Their rivalry basically becomes a running gag throughout the movie, which is perfectly showcased in a hysterically brutal sequence in which the pair try to out-kill each other. Margot Robbie gives what I think is her best performance as Harley Quinn to date. This film delves into her insanity even more than I think Birds of Prey did, which is saying something considering that was basically a Harley Quinn movie. When this movie explores her mental state, the movie allows its audience to perceive things as Harley does, which for me made me all the more invested in her character. She is so much more unpredictable and funnier than she's ever been, and on the whole is an absolute joy on screen, proving once again that Margot Robbie is perfectly cast as Harley Quinn. Joel Kinnaman is a very much welcomed return in this movie. He felt a lot more like a hero I could genuinely root for this time around, and his arc was a major highlight for me, as was his camaraderie with Harley Quinn. I really dig the relationship and the mutual respect that those characters have for one another, and I also really enjoy enjoyed King Shark. The voice work by Sylvester Stallone is brilliant. He very much reminded me of K2SO from Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, in that he's a character that could have easily become very irritating, but luckily he was a risk that paid off. The frankly adorable childlike naivety of King Shark contrasted perfectly with his thirst for living flesh, resulting in a number of moments that had me laughing my ass off. Viola Davis once again nails it as Amanda Waller. She is a true force to be reckoned with and a highly intimidating, foreboding presence throughout the film, literally acting as the hand of death that could decide the fate of any squad member she deems to be disobedient. Daniela Melchior was wonderful as Ratcatcher 2. Her performance was very emotionally driven. She perfectly captured the spirit of a kid who was really down on their luck and in need of people that she could call friends or even family. I also unexpectedly really dug Polka Dot Man, played by David Dastmalchian. He was tragically hilarious in that, like many of the other characters, he has a pretty tragic and dark past, but the film chooses to explore it in a way that I really did not expect, and it might be the funniest thing in a movie. And that's all I'ma say on that one. James Gunn's pugnacious and crude sense of humor is smothered all over this movie, and this might be James Gunn's funniest movie for me because The Suicide Squad is considerably darker and grittier than Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and while I find both of those movies highly hilarious, Gunn takes full advantage of The Suicide Squad's R rating. There are some really dark jokes in this movie, whether it's in the way that a lot of the deaths are presented, the dialogue, or much of the bloodier details. Thanks to the R rating, the humor feels more free and wild to really break boundaries and go places that PG-13 comic book movies perhaps wouldn't be able to go. The action also highly benefits from the choice to go R. The action is bloody and brutal in hilariously and sometimes emotionally disturbing ways, and it is glorious. In many ways, this movie feels like a Vietnam War movie, with the characters wandering through a forest and trying to infiltrate a country that is fighting against America, but you can also see that influence in the action sequences. Much of the action really harkens back to the 80s action movies that were heavily influenced by the Vietnam War, like Predator. In fact, there is a sequence in this movie that feels like a direct homage to the opening action sequence of Predator, but there's even some World War II imagery sprinkled throughout the movie, most notably a sequence set on a beach that legit feels like D-Day. I would actually agree if someone came up to me and said that this is a war movie disguised as a comic book movie, because that's exactly what it is. Sure, there's a big giant threat that the squad have to take down in the end, but not only is the threat really well built up and utilized, but much of the movie is focused on the Suicide Squad infiltrating an enemy country to the US and going up against that country's military and corrupt leaders. That's what I feel a Suicide Squad movie really should be: a team of villains forced to work for the government, going to various locations and countries and taking down terrorists and corrupt governments along the way. And that's exactly what this movie is. That alone demonstrates that this film is in the capable hands of a filmmaker that truly understands how to adapt the Suicide Squad from the pages of the comics to the big screen. The Suicide Squad is without question a showcase for James Gunn's skill as a writer and director. He blends action and drama with his sick, twisted, and witty sense of humor masterfully. Sure, this is something James Gunn's done before, but with the Suicide Squad's R rating, it really allows Gunn to do this in a comparatively more wild and insane way. I would even say that the Suicide Squad is the best DC movie since The Dark Knight, but if I had one issue with the film, it would be that the villains are incredibly one-dimensional and barely leave a lasting impact. They occasionally show up, do or say something horrible to remind us how evil they are, and then they're gone until they're ready to remind the audience that they exist. But even then, I wouldn't really say the movie suffers from that in any way, because much of the tension is derived from the core group of characters in Task Force X. The Suicide Squad is a ceaselessly shocking and hilarious showcase of DC C to F-list villains that is just as emotionally investing as it is absurd. James Gunn absolutely nails it this time around, delivering a film that demonstrates a care and passion to characters that may not receive such attention from a different set of hands, and a clear understanding of the whole concept of the Suicide Squad. I had a wonderful time watching the Suicide Squad, which gets a 9.7 out of 10. So that was my review of the Suicide Squad. Thank you so much as always for watching. Before I go though, I would just like to ask you guys, what did you think of the Suicide Squad? Did you think it was good? Did you think it was bad? Did you think it was somewhere in the middle? Please leave your thoughts down below in the comments, and I will indeed see you guys in the next one. Until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you always.